right corner. If you're still trying to join, it'll still be there. I'm gonna go ahead and start, but the code's right here if you still need it. I'm gonna go full screen. Okay, so like Ms. Wallace said, we're gonna start our introduction to cell division. And has anybody sleep, spring break, St. Augustine? No spring break plans, that's okay. Sometimes you just want to sleep and take a break from school. Cool. So now we're going to jump into the science part. And we just answered this question, so you guys should be right on top of it. But how many pairs of chromosomes do people normally have?
Sorry, I jumped the gun, but this is good because now that means everybody should respond.
Alright, so we got 10 people. Let's take a look. 23, 23, 23. You can also see people typing on here, so that's really cool too. Like, I don't have to wait to figure out if people are going to answer or not. Awesome, so you guys nailed that. Perfect. So yeah, humans have 23 pairs, and we have 46 total, and this is just kind of a comparison of what other animals and organisms have. It's actually really random. Like, tobacco has more than us. Watermelon has about half. It's totally random, but fruit flies are definitely interesting. They only have 8, so scientists actually use them for research a lot because they have so few. It's easy to study their entire genome because they don't have that many chromosomes to study. So why do we have pairs of chromosomes? Why don't we have like an odd number of chromosomes? And this isn't I don't have a question for this, so someone can unmute or answer in the chat. Yep, I get one from each parent. Perfect. Yeah, and fun fact, actually, there are some animals, when you have hybrid animals like mules, which is a mix between a donkey and a horse don't have the same number of chromosomes. So when you get a mule baby, they have an odd number of chromosomes because their parents were uneven, so they get one. And I'll explain that later, but it's pretty interesting, and that's why mules are sterile and they can't have babies. So yeah, I also, to kind of remember the number, I think of 23andMe, if you've ever seen the commercials for genetic testing. 23 pairs, like, make you who you are. Like, that's all your genes to make up all of you. And so I found this really cool website on the Human Genome Project because we've actually, scientists have mapped out the entire human genome, which is really cool. And they're still discovering more every day. But this is kind of a chart showing you which diseases can be found on which chromosomes. So if you do genetic testing, or if you've ever done genetic testing, they have markers for things like colon cancer. I know breast cancer's on here, blindness, like literally this huge chart of what's on each chromosome. So if you want to check that out, it's on the Human Genome Project. Has anybody ever done genetic testing that wants to share, like, maybe what they found out about their family? I haven't, but I'd like to.
I have. Have any of my kids done that? Have any of you guys done it? It's not as prevalent, I guess, for teenagers. They're not as worried.
Yeah, yeah.
I did it, and my dad is a big history buff, and so we had done the ancestry where he traced back our lineage through documents before, 23andMe was a thing, and then I did 23andMe about 4 years ago, probably, and when your aunts did, Bob, yeah, and it actually really confirmed all of the documents we found, essentially, like, where my family originated, and it was like 99% English, UK. And I was like, yeah, obviously, but it really helped me out. And there were like some other diseases that it said, like, I had like a slight risk gap, or I didn't have any risk. It was really cool. Really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I have not done it, but I would really like to.
It's cool.
But yeah,
I think I got it as like a gift.
Yeah.
For Christmas.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. It shows you like likelihood of getting diseases. It can also just show like random stuff. Like, there's a gene for whether or not you think oregano. I think it's oregano. Whether or not you like oregano or cilantro, maybe cilantro.
I hate cilantro, and that is a genetic thing that we'll talk about. Like, my dad and I hate it. My mom, my sister can't even taste it. And I'm like, it's the worst.
Yeah.
Zach can't taste it, and I hate it. I was like, if it's even the smallest bit is in food, it ruins the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to say, really quickly before you keep going, that poster that you just showed, I'm pretty sure Miss Tori has it in her room because she teaches genetics as an elective. So she teaches genetics as an entire class at Athens. It's like an AP level elective. And so you have to have bio honors as a prerequisite. And so generally you're a junior or senior before you take her class, but I'm pretty sure she's got that same poster hanging up. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. All right. So I wanted to show this slide because this tripped me up even in college. Chromosomes would get so confusing to me because this is a chromosome here, but this is also a chromosome. The only difference here is that the DNA has been replicated. So if you see that they're connected in the middle here, that's still one chromosome. Both of these chromatids have the exact same genetic information. It's just duplicated to get ready for cell division, which is what you guys will be talking about after spring break. Down here, these two are chromatids, but they're not sister chromatids. They're not connected. So this would be what you get from mom, and this would be what you get from dad, and they're homologous, and then this is what they would look like duplicated. So this is a chromosome, this is a chromosome. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're fine. To help you understand this, because you're correct, it gets really confusing when you're like, wait, which one's a chromosome? Is it the one that's single or is it the one that's double? That's how I remember it. I call the one on the top left, they can be called a chromatid, and we'll talk more about that. I call that a single chromosome. And if it's duplicated, because the DNA has copied itself, I call it a double chromosome. So that's the way I keep it straight in my head. They're both chromosomes. We just give them different names depending on exactly what they look like. And so I call this one a single chromosome and this one a double chromosome. And so like this yellow one on the left is a single chromosome and the blue one is a single chromosome. And then they both double themselves and they're both still chromosomes. At this point, I call them double chromosomes, if that helps. And we're going to practice that because it is so confusing sometimes.
Yeah, so here's another paired up question. Why does DNA need to replicate at all? Why does it matter? And what do you think would happen if DNA didn't replicate? And again, this is a bigger question, so if you want to come off mute and try to answer, that's fine too. Alright, so if DNA didn't replicate, cells wouldn't be able to make copies of themselves. That's true, right? Because if a cell is dividing and the DNA didn't duplicate, each cell is only going to have half of the DNA. So if a cell goes to make a protein and is looking for the DNA for it, but doesn't have it because it's in that other cell, they're not going to be able to make proteins that they need. Cells wouldn't be able to reproduce, they wouldn't be able to divide. And we're going to get into this more during cell division, but just kind of dip your feet in the water. Yep, they wouldn't be able to have the DNA instructions. Yep, you need proteins to heal injuries. Proteins do that. And yeah, yep, looks like you guys got it. Cool. So I know this is a karyotype, we just went over that, but what would we use this for? Why would we want to look at a bunch of like squiggly chromosomes on a page? What can that tell us? I'll let you guys type. I know there might be pressure if I have your typing up on the screen.
While we're waiting on you guys to answer, first of all, you guys are doing great. Secondly, my best friend is a genetic counselor. And so she actually does this on a daily basis. You know, a patient will go to the doctor and the doctor will take their blood and then it gets sent off to a lab, and the lab creates a karyotype, and then this type of picture and more detailed information, but specifically this will go to my best friend. She'll analyze it and read it, and then she sits down with the patient and counsels them on what results she found. So she has a really cool job, and she uses this every single day.
Yep, it can show us mutations, structural problems with chromosomes. Like we just looked at that big chart. If you have, half of a chromosome missing, you can look on that chart and see all the genes that you're going to be missing. Medical problems, how the chromosomes are paired. Yeah, these are all really good answers. And so we can also get into, the ethical dilemma of using karyotypes, right? Because it's kind of one of those with great power becomes great responsibility things. Like, would you want to know ahead of time if your child had a disease like that? Or with, 23andMe, you could find out potentially, am I going to have Alzheimer's when I get older? And would you want to know that information ahead of time? And what would you do with that information? And then also, who should have access to that, right? I know there's a big debate about, how privatized genetic results could be, because, if an insurance company finds out that you're predisposed to cancer, they could jack up your rates because they're like, oh, well, you're going to get cancer later. So kind of thinking about the ethical uses of karyotypes and how that can affect people. Does anyone have any thoughts on that before I move on? Would you want to know ahead of time if you had a genetic disease? Like, would you want to know if you were going to get Alzheimer's later in life? Not really. No, I don't know if I would either. I don't know if I'd want to look at those results. That's why I don't know if I want to get genetic testing. Amy would. Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, I can tell you that my mom had breast cancer at a young age, and she's fine now. She's healed and everything. But it was one thing that I did because I needed to know in terms of preventative care for myself and like my sister, that sort of thing. So like sometimes it's nice to be able, because there's a potential that you could get bad news, but at least in the case of that, I could prepare for it. Like I believe, oh crap, what's her name? I can't think of it now. She was married to Brad Pitt.
Yeah, she had the double mastectomy.
Angelina Jolie.
Yeah.
She had a double mastectomy, meaning she had both of her breasts removed without having breast cancer because she had such a high risk of it. She said, forget it. I'm not even going to take the chance of having it. She also had a lot of money and could do that and had like reconstruction and everything's great. But it's something to think about. Some things you may not want to know, some things you may want to know. Yep. Good question.
All right, so based on what you guys know about chromosomes so far, whose gamete determines the sex of a baby, the male or the female? Does the mom or the dad determine whether or not the baby will be a male or female?
You may have to explain that a little bit more. We haven't quite gotten into that.
Oh, okay. That's okay. Okay, I'm seeing the male. That's okay if you guys don't know yet. Male and female split. You can take your best guess. So I'm seeing female take the lead. Yeah. So I know a lot of times it's actually the father that determines the sex of the baby, and you might have heard of like King Henry and his wives, and like he kept killing his wives because they wouldn't give him a boy. But females, since they have an XX chromosome, the mom. So I don't know if you guys have touched on like females are XX and males are XY, but moms give an X chromosome to the baby, and that's all they can give, right? That just an X chromosome because that's all they have. The father can give an X or a Y, so if he gives an X, it would be a female child, and if it was a Y, it would be a male child. So it's actually the male that determines the sex of the child, even though, so when King Henry was killing his wives, like it was his own fault, like he just kept giving X's instead of Y's. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they had that misconception back then.
Yeah, they also have, because it's always the woman's fault, it was, because they didn't know much about how, babies, so the woman was carrying it, so it had to be her fault, right? But there's also some biological studies going on as to men who produce, like, technically it's supposed to be 50-50, right? 50% of their sperm should say X, 50% of their sperm should say Y. But there are studies and research going on to suggest that for some men, it's not a 50-50. And a lot of their sperm may be just X's or just Y's for some reason. And so, like in the case of King Henry, I'm assuming there was something biologically with him that was causing maybe his sperm cells that had X's on them to just live longer or swim better or something like that. There's a lot of research going on with that.
Yeah, because you see families that have all boys and they're like, we're going to try again for a girl, and they can get another boy. So yeah, that's interesting. So which mutation, we talked a little bit about like the chromosome being a big ball of yarn and the DNA being like a strand of yarn. Which mutation do you think would have bigger effects on a person? A chromosomal mutation or a DNA like strand mutation? Chromosome. All right, seem pretty unanimous there. Yeah, because it's affecting the whole chromosome instead of just part of the DNA, right? If you snip a piece of yarn, that's, it's just a little piece of yarn missing. But if you cut the whole thing of yarn in half, like, you're going to have a bunch of little yarn pieces tattered all over the floor. I crochet, so I really like that analogy. But yeah, so looking here, like, if you mutate a chromosome and you take a whole piece of it out, like, there's a whole bunch of genes on there. Like, we looked at that poster, that's a lot of genes that are being affected versus maybe one little mutation that only affects one protein, or maybe doesn't even affect anything at all. It could be a silent mutation. That's not to say that some DNA mutations can have really big effects on people. Like, just a few nucleotides can cause some pretty big diseases. But generally, chromosomal mutations are going to have bigger effects. So this one's more of an observational thing. Science is really big on observations. But do you notice anything unusual about this karyotype? And I didn't put a question for this either. It's just whoever spots it first. If you like the I Spy games. What's different about this one? Yep, the 21st chromosome. There's a third one, right? Like, there's only supposed to be 2 right there. Does anyone know what the effects of a third chromosome on the 21st chromosome would be? Down syndrome. Yep, trisomy 21. Perfect. You guys already know this stuff. Yeah, so this would cause Down syndrome. Does anyone know how that might happen? Like, how would 3 chromosomes end up here? And you don't have to know this yet. Again, this is going to lead into the cell division unit. But does anyone have any ideas?
We very, very briefly talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah, one parent might give an extra one. Yeah, so that would cause just one little chromosome like failing to separate correctly during cell division is going to cause Down syndrome. And so I also have a little graph here because data interpretation is really important in science. You can make all these pretty graphs, but if you don't know what they're saying, they don't do you a whole lot of good. So what is this graph telling us about Down syndrome? What does it mean?
Allie, I can help look at the chat and I'll let you know if someone responds so you don't have to keep going back and forth.
Okay, thanks.
I know, that's like the worst part of like virtual stuff.
Yeah, so on the x-axis down here, we have the mother's age in years, and on the y-axis we have prevalence of Down syndrome per number of live births.
And we've got a couple people in the chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the risk of Down syndrome increases with age. Perfect. Yeah, and that's actually true. Like, they've done a lot of research on this. And so mothers who decide to have children as they get older, there's a much larger risk of having a child with Down syndrome. And I think that's related to the fact that, like, women get their eggs, like, they have them for their whole lives. They don't continually make them like men make sperm. And so these eggs are kind of just sitting there for a long time, they're not collecting dust, but like collecting dust, and there's more chance for mutations.
That's the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, and so they're just sitting there, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong when they, as they get older. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. All right, here's another spot the difference, if you will. What is unusual about this karyotype? Yep, there's 2 Y chromosomes. I guess there's kind of a spoiler up there in the corner, but they have an extra Y chromosome. So it's similar to Down syndrome, except it's just a different chromosome. So this is XYY syndrome, and so someone born with an extra Y chromosome would have male sex traits. It's kind of rare. It's 1 in 1,000, and really it doesn't cause that many. It doesn't cause as drastic differences as Down syndrome would. They'll be taller than average. They have an increased risk of learning disabilities. They might be prone to severe acne, or they might have, some behavioral problems. But without using a karyotype, do you think this would be easy or difficult to diagnose? Like just looking at someone, just getting to know them. Difficult. Yeah, because some of these, like I said, a lot of chromosomal mutations will be deadly. Like if you're missing a certain chromosome, that has a lot of important genes on it, the baby often wouldn't survive. But for something like this, when they have an extra one, it doesn't really cause that many problems. You probably wouldn't be able to tell looking at somebody. Now, does this necessarily mean that everyone who's taller than average or has bad acne has an extra Y chromosome? No, that's not what that means. Not every tall high schooler you see, that doesn't mean they have an extra Y chromosome. But these are the typical symptoms associated with that. But yeah, it might be pretty hard to tell someone apart if you didn't look at their karyotype. All right, so here's one more. There's only like 2 more of these. I'm not going to make you guys spot the difference all day. But here's another one. Three X's. Yep. So there's 3 X chromosomes right here. So this is going to be triple X syndrome. And somebody born with 3 X chromosomes is going to have female sex traits. Similar to the last one, a lot of them either have very few symptoms or none at all. Like it just doesn't really affect them that much. They might have delayed speech or learning disabilities. They might be taller than average again. So again, like similar to the last one, this might be harder to diagnose, just looking at somebody without looking at their karyotype. And again, just because these things could happen doesn't necessarily mean that they always do. It seems kind of random, but some people will have delayed motor development and delayed speech, and then someone else with it you won't really notice anything. And so, okay, yeah, there's 2 more. This is the second to last one. I'll give you a hint. It's another sex chromosome one, but what sex do you think the baby would be, right? Because women have 2 X's, and men have an X and a Y. So what do you think? What do you think would happen here?
This is also one we'll go into more detail when we get to genetics, but it's a really good one to talk about now since we're looking at karyotypes.
Yeah, so this is called Klinefelter syndrome, and someone with this will typically show male sex traits. And that's because if you have whether you have 1 Y chromosome or 2 or 3, I don't know if you can have 3, but if you have any Y chromosomes, typically you're going to show male sex traits. But they do have lower testosterone, so they'd have reduced muscle mass and less facial hair. Because of that extra X chromosome, it's going to kind of decrease the amount of male traits that they show. And like Ms. Wallace said, you guys are going to get more into this. I'm not super educated on this topic, but I do think it's really interesting to talk about.
So what happens here with the chromosomes, and I'm sorry to cut you off, I didn't mean
to. No, you're good.
What happens with the chromosomes here, the sex chromosomes really influence the hormones that are made. So everybody, male or female, have estrogen and testosterone, okay? That's why gender is a construct culturally, but biologically, everybody has both. It's just a matter of which one you have more of, okay? And so, like, females generally have more estrogen, males generally have more testosterone, and when we get the wrong number here, that's where you end up seeing certain traits because hormone levels are being affected. And so this person is technically male. They have only male genitalia, and they look male, but it's more of a feminine feature biologically. They may have like a less bone structure in their face. They may not be able to grow hair as much, so they may not be able to grow a beard. They may just be less hairy overall. Reduced muscle mass, their voice might be a little bit higher because testosterone through puberty, that's what changes your voice box and your vocal cords. So their voice may be a little bit higher. A lot of times you don't in some cases, you may not even know that someone has this, honestly. Sometimes it is extreme enough to be able to tell, but it's just, when it comes down to these sex chromosomes, it has to do with hormone levels and productions.
Yep. All right, so last one. What is unusual about this one? Yep, there's no Y. There's just one X chromosome. Oh, this thing's going to pop up every time I switch screens. Yeah, so this is Turner syndrome. They only have one X chromosome, so it would be a female because there's no Y chromosome, even though they only have one X. And so for this one, they might be shorter than average. They might have some heart defects. They might have, it's called a webbed neck, where their neck is like a little bit wider. They could have learning disabilities or other physical abnormalities. Again, it's different case by case, which is really interesting to think about, just how one chromosome, they're missing that same chromosome, but it can look different in different people.
Yeah, and that one, so I'm going to go off a little bit more, and then I'll let you take it away.
Yeah.
And that one is monosomy, right? So mono means one. So that's an example of monosomy, where the mutation is that one whole entire chromosome was deleted. Because if she had had another X, she would be a normal female. If she had had a Y, she would be a normal male, right? With Turner syndrome, essentially you can think of it as she is female, she has female genitalia, but she essentially stays a child. She doesn't have enough estrogen hormone to go through puberty. So they have like heart defects and some physical abnormalities too, and possible learning disabilities. But a lot of it does have to do with puberty as well. That's why they stay shorter than average. And that doesn't just mean like short, like I'm 5'2", I'm short, but that's like a different level, okay? They typically will never get a period or develop breasts or anything like that. Like they stay stunted a little bit in terms of puberty. Go for it.
Yep. So it's purple. This is a cell that you would just look at under a microscope, and it's purple because they've stained it so that you can see the chromosomes better. But all the karyotypes we've looked at so far are nice and organized. They're each numbered. Like, when you look in a cell, they're not going to be lined up, and they're definitely not going to have numbers under them. So you can tell, like, oh, like, this is chromosome number 2, this is number 3. Like, scientists have to organize, like, this mess of, chromosomes that are kind of wiggling around everywhere. They don't wiggle. But they're in the cell, and they remind me of worms. But so, yeah, scientists have to do a lot of work to kind of get them from this to this. So how would you organize chromosomes? What do you notice about how they've been organized so far? And this one is a Pear Deck question. Length, largest to smallest, size, length and shape. Yeah, what do you notice about the coloring of them, maybe? It looks like there's, like, they're kind of stripy. Yeah, so chromosomes have banding on them, so banded patterns, and you can see it best in this one right here. These are both chromosome 19 because they both have this little black band right here, so they're kind of matching. And these are like this one's scrunched up a little, but they're still chromosome number 1, and you can see they also have banding that match right here. So that's how we can tell which ones go together. But you guys are also right, they're also sorted by size. They kind of go from large to small, so those are good observations. So the gizmo that we're going to do now, you guys are going to try to do maybe what Miss Wallace's genetic counselor friend would do and sort these chromosomes with a gizmo. And so, let me log in. There we go. So,
So if you guys, while she's getting this pulled up, I'm sorry, you guys log into your own Gizmo account, and then you'll see the one called human karyotyping. Click on that, okay? Because she's going to walk you through a little bit of it, but I want you guys to go ahead and have it up. But make sure you're listening to her, because she's going to show you what you're doing, and she's going to explain what you need to do kind of as like your assessment for this, okay?
Yep. So I'll give you guys a second to get there.